Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 30th November 2020. In this video, we'll be discussing about a couple of issues. The first one with respect to the farmer protests. The second one is with respect to the Paris climate deal and how it is not sufficient to deal with the present problem of climate change. Recently, the government has passed three farm bills which created a free trade regime in agriculture. So, the protest that we are witnessing right now is with respect to one particular act, especially from the farmers of Punjab. So, the present act that we're talking about is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Protection and Facilitation Act. However, we also have to understand there are certain provisions which are a cause of concern in this case. Let us have a look at these provisions. But before that, let us also take a look at the Essential Commodities Act. So basically, what happened in the Essential Commodities Act is they did away with the center's powers to impose stockholding limits on foodstuffs. However, there is a caveat. There are certain extraordinary circumstances under which the government can still impose the stockholding limits on foodstuffs. For example, in the recent times, after this act was amended, we have seen the government invoking the Essential Commodities Act to prevent onion prices going beyond a certain threshold. So, as per the law, if perishable goods increase beyond 100%, the price of the perishable goods increase beyond 100%, then they can impose this stockholding limits. Similarly, in the case of non-perishable items, it is 50%. Now, things have taken a political turn when a certain section of the farming community started believing that this move will actually put a restraint on their trading practices. So, for example, you have to understand that as per the amended law in Essential Commodities Act, the amendments exempts processors, exporters, and other value chain participants. Now, what do you understand by this? Say, for example, a company wants to set up a tomato sauce manufacturing unit in a particular area. In that area, if the processor wants to stock up tomatoes, even when there is a shortage in the market, he is allowed to do so because he has taken from the government a permission seeking the same thing. So it is only a problem if he is hoarding this beyond a certain limit, beyond his installed capacity. And there are restrictions on traders. We still have these restrictions because there is a possibility that they are not adding any value or creating any jobs or end product for export or domestic consumption here. They're just trying to make money. So government has rightly imposed certain restrictions on traders. So this should not be a problem, but farmers are fearing that corporates will exploit them. That is a unwarranted fear, and the government must address the benefits of corporates trying to enter the agribusiness. The government must play a role of being a regulator and as well as a facilitator, both for corporates and farmers in this case. The second act is about contract farming. It is titled the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. This has to do with providing a regulatory framework for contract cultivation. Say, for example, take the case of potato chips. A company like, say, Lay's wants to enter into an agreement for a particular quality and gradation of potatoes with farmers. This will ensure that as long as the farmers ensure the quality, that they will be getting a certain minimum guarantee price as per the contract. So this is also a benefit to the farmer, and also here the government must play a role of a regulator and a facilitator in case the companies are trying to ensure that they are exploiting the farmers. In that case, they should act as a regulator, and whenever there are certain issues with quality, it should act as a facilitator to help the farmers to ensure that quality. In this way, the government can bridge the gap between the companies and the farmers. This will increase the price discovery and ensure a stable income for farmers. Till now, farming has never been a stable entrepreneurial activity. The vision of our country should be to move towards that entrepreneurial ability and look at farming enterprise as a profit making venture. If that is not happening, no matter whatever we do, if there is no price discovery, farmer will continue to suffer or he will have low incomes, which is completely unethical given the fact that he toils so hard for his produce. Now, this brings us to the third and problematic act of FPTC. So, the bone of contention here is it allows sale and purchase of farm produce outside the premises of APMC mandis. So, previously it was mandated that all the produce should be sold at APMC mandis only. What this means is previously the state government used to get a certain fee for trading on this platform. Now the law has actually removed that market fee and also said that the players who are involved in this trade can actually carry out a no market fee model, or there is no cess or there is no levy. So under any state APMC act or any other state law, the government cannot do anything with this respect. So essentially it is taking away the power from state governments. So this has been the problem. In order to understand this issue, let us go into the constitutional provisions and look at the powers of the union as well as the state in this respect. If we take a look at the entry number 33 in the constitution of the concurrent list, it covers trade and commerce in foodstuffs including edible oil and oil seeds, fodder, cotton and other stuffs like jute. But if you take a look at the trade and commerce aspect, they completely belong to the state. Even in the case of agricultural trade, it belongs to the state. Only those aspects which are related to the interstate trade aspect, they are under the concurrent list. So the question asked right now is, with which power is the government at the center trying to impose this FPTC Act? The answer is entry number 33 of the constitution. But is it a right interpretation? That is subject to judicial review. Preliminary understanding says that the center can pass any law that removes any obstacles to both inter and intrastate trade in farm produce while also overriding the existing state APMC acts. So the FPTC Act has in some way done exactly that. So some experts make a distinction between agricultural marketing and agricultural trade. This is open to interpretation and judicial review can be sought out. Some states like Maharashtra welcome this new act because they have a huge export potential. Say, for example, in the recent times, after the lockdown in the months of August and September, the government imposed the Essential Commodities Act because the government wanted to ensure domestic supply because the prices have crossed the threshold of 100%, which was set in the act. The farmers here in Maharashtra were not really happy because they were getting a good export price. They wanted to send it out. But when you take the case of farmers in Haryana, and if you take the case of farmers in Punjab as well, who have traditionally benefited from this Essential Commodities Act and the usual MSP regime, they wanted the MSP to be made a legal right. You have to understand that MSP is not a legal right, it is just a social welfare measure by most of the states. Now, in this context, in 2015, there was a report called the Shanta Kumar Committee report. This report said that just 6% of the farmers knew about the benefits of MSP. So that means Haryana and Punjab farmers or the lower Gangetic Plain farmers in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar were the beneficiaries of this MSP regime, but not the rest of the farmers. Therefore, it is practically impossible for the government to procure everything through this MSP regime. Therefore, we have to ensure that this FPTC Act and the Essential Commodities Act, which prevents the stockholding and also all the farm laws, happen in reality, and agriculture becomes a remunerative business. This second article, taken from the Hindu, is titled "The Paris Agreement is no panacea." So we have already covered this topic in detail in the environmental classes. So this is a sort of a revision. I'll tell you the basic philosophy behind it. When we have two set of countries, namely the developed countries and the developing countries, so naturally these countries have increased their greenhouse gas emissions to a significant level even before the climate change talks were taken seriously in 1997 through Kyoto Protocol. And the developing countries had huge energy demands, especially a country like India, where the per capita utilization of this carbon emissions, or if you actually quantify the per capita emissions, it is 100 times lesser than that of USA. So you can imagine the necessity of energy, and India is doing its best to make a transition towards the cleaner energy. But the problem here is developing countries are not taking up responsibility for the historical mess that they have created through rapid industrialization, which are unsustainable in their models, and expecting the developing countries to pay the price for that is very cruel. So when the Paris climate change agreement was arrived at, everybody treated it as a success in the media. But if you take a look at the IPCC reports and comments, most of them expressed a huge disappointment with the way these talks carried out. The main reason is the IPCC reports have said that we have to contain the temperature rise between 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. So the fundamental principle that is involved in this uh, Paris climate change is the concept of NDC, which is nationally determined contribution. But if you take the example of Kyoto Protocol, which began in 1997 and is going to end in 2020, after which the Paris climate deal is going to be initiated, the fundamental difference is Kyoto Protocol had targets. Now, with nationally determined contributions, it is up to the countries to decide how much they can reduce. Now, this is a non starter because even if we take the combined efforts into consideration, we are definitely far from reaching this target of containing the climate change, and far from achieving the target of limiting the temperature rise globally by 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, which was mandated by IPCC. If we go at the present rate, we might be increasing the temperature up to 3 degrees Celsius, which will have devastating effects on the climatic patterns in our world. What happens if this temperature rise happens? We'll see ocean acidification, a lot of corals will die, we'll see extreme climatic events, we will see loss of productivity, we will witness extreme heat and extreme cold and sudden urban floods. Phenomenon like all this will become a norm rather than an exception. So we have to do better. We have to renegotiate the Paris climate change, and we have to ensure that both developing and developed countries work together, just like how it was supposed to be under Kyoto Protocol. So as a part of this, the developed countries must adhere to this common but differentiated responsibilities and polluter must pay principles. Now, what are this? Common but differentiated responsibility, as we've already discussed in our classes, would mean that developed countries, which were historically responsible for the mess that they've created through increased greenhouse gas emissions, will take up the majority of the responsibility to contain this climate change and allow a small window of time for countries like India to handle their energy requirements to solve the problem of poverty. And the second principle is polluter must pay principle. So this gives a sense of responsibility to the person who is polluting the environment. So if, say for example, a ship tries to navigate across a water body and spills oil in it, this ship owning company is expected to pay up for cleaning the mess that it has created. This is the principle of polluter must pay. So in every walk of life we have to inculcate this principle of CBDR and polluter must pay, otherwise we are in for a huge challenge. The world is not going to be the same, and COVID would seem like a small problem when we are talking about climate change. So that is the gist of this article.